Hi everyone, welcome to 1% Crime. I know you can't sleep, so I'll accompany you with crime stories that happened all over the world. Before we get to the story, tell me where did you hear it from? And if you like this content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump straight into the story. No story is more sorrowful in the world than the tale of Romeo and Juliet, concludes the Duke in the most famous story about two lovers. Yet in Shakespeare's tragedy, Romeo and Juliet end their lives by their own choice, while in our story, the young lover solves the problem differently. The creation of the Borden family began in Missouri. Michael and Catherine met in school. They were classmates. Michael was captivated by his blonde, radiant, and responsive classmate. In the upper grades, he tried various ways to get her attention. He helped with homework and invited her out for walks. This way, they became best friends and spent a lot of time together, learning lessons and sharing secrets with each other. Gradually, their friendship turned into something more, and they realized they were in love with each other. Michael invited Catherine on a date, where he first declared his love. After some time, the young people got married. The wedding was a beautiful and memorable ceremony, where Michael and Catherine promised to love each other in all life circumstances. After 10 years of marriage, the family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania. Lititz was founded by members of the Moravian Church in 1756, and it was inhabited by descendants of Moravian communities. The primary population of the town were faithful families who sought refuge in their oasis from the horrors of modern life. Life in the town was quiet and peaceful. Many families belonged to the Christian Amish community and led a lifestyle befitting a believer. Their life was simple, with people trying to do without many modern technologies. The Borden family was deeply devout, so the choice of Lititz was no accident. This suburb seemed perfectly suited for the birth and upbringing of children. Life flowed so calmly that a new day was just like the last. This was precisely what the Bordens were looking for: complete family solitude and creation in solitude with God. Michael served in the local church community and taught lessons in Sunday school. Catherine primarily managed the household and assisted her husband in his work. In the community, Michael worked more for spiritual wealth. For everyday worldly needs, he had to work as a manager at a printing company. In the following years, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Most families living in Lititz were large, with some having more than 5 children. Hoping to shield their children from the hardships and dangers of the larger world, families regularly attended church, while local teenagers joined youth groups and were homeschooled. Interactions between families were limited to joint religious societies and celebrations. The family idol created by Michael Borden lasted for many years, with children being raised in faith and discipline. In the early 2000s, the eldest sons, having reached adulthood, went to university and moved to another city to study. This left 3 children at home, who continued their homeschooling to the delight of their parents. Neighbors and the couple's few friends spoke highly of the children's upbringing and their diverse interests. Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel were exemplary, kind, and responsive. But it wasn't always this way. As the eldest daughter, Kara, entered her teenage years, it turned the family's traditional ways upside down. Despite her father's prohibitions, she began playing in the local soccer team, sneaking out to discos and thoughtlessly doing everything she had been forbidden to do before. The young beauty's behavior deeply shook her father. Many hours of talks and instructions did not resonate in Kara's heart. Reasons for arguments appeared, which time and again led to the young rebel's escape. The girl openly showed interest in young men and sought relationships. Thus, in 2005, 18-year-old David and 14-year-old Kara met in a support group for students involved in homeschooling issues. The young people, with their passionate hearts attracted to all things forbidden, quickly established warm, friendly relations. Secretly from their parents, they agreed and created social media profiles, where they began actively exchanging messages. The correspondence was lengthy and very emotional. They exchanged well-encoded messages to keep their communication secret from everyone as long as possible. After a while, exchanging letters was not enough, and they began secretly meeting. At first, these were harmless walks in quiet, secluded places around the city. Then their friendly relationship evolved into a romantic one. They ran away together at night to discos and spent time together until morning. David was older and had already experienced first love and disappointment. Kara was so young that her new, bright feelings could hardly be contained. She didn't just walk, she seemed to fly, and the happy smile never left her beautiful face. Meeting David brought back the obedient Kara to her parents. Her father was overjoyed, believing that the teenage challenges were a thing of the past. But Michael was mistaken. Only the fear of being discovered by her parents quelled the girl's inner fire as she hid her love from them. This deeply saddened Kara. She knew what their reaction to such early relationships would be, as she had been instilled with entirely different concepts of possible love between a man and a woman from childhood, trying to protect her from such knowledge for as long as possible. Fearing their parents' negative reaction, the young couple carefully guarded their secret. But sooner or later, all secrets come to light. One day, unable to hold back, Kara shared her secret with her sister. She showed her a photo of David, shared how their relationship began, and that they were so in love and determined to be together against all odds that they were ready to run away. Her sister, fearful for Kara, told their mother about the planned elopement. Thus the secret of the young lovers was revealed. One early morning, the young woman climbed through the window into the house and quietly, like a mouse, went up to her room. Elated, Kara was returning from another date with her David. She entered her room and froze. Her mother was sitting on her bed. Everything became clear without words. After breakfast, a conversation took place in which her parents forbade her any relationship with the young man. They were shocked, having shielded their children from violence, controlled substances, and other negative stories that such misfortune had befallen them. Kara's father was so outraged and disappointed that he forbade her from leaving her room. That night, Kara Borden spent in David's house. At 5:30 a.m., the young lover dropped her off near her house. They agreed that as soon as Kara safely returned to her room, she would send him a text message. However, the awaited message never came. David called her home several times and sent a few messages on social media. An hour later, Kara informed him that she was caught and asked him to come over so her parents could talk to him. David arrived at the appointed time. The conversation began with the father expressing deep indignation and forbidding the young man from seeing his daughter. Kara's parents' morals and stance were very conservative. They were categorically against relationships at their daughter's young age. Words of love did not touch the father's heart. He warned the young man that if he saw him with Kara again, he would be compelled to report him to the police for involvement with a minor. The lengthy emotional conversation ended on a high note. Kara was locked in her room again, and David left with nothing. The young man got into his old car and drove away, crying for the first time over a girl, or maybe out of hurt that he was not taken seriously. The separation was very difficult. The lovers struggled greatly through the long days apart. They couldn't withstand the test of separation, so they devised a plan to deceive everyone by accepting Kara's father's conditions, pretend to break up, but continue their secret love. And they convincingly played the part of former lovers. In public places or at church, they didn't even greet each other. Kara's parents were appeased, convinced they had protected their daughter from a youthful mistake. David missed her terribly. In the evenings he read Shakespeare, imagining openly serenading his beloved like Romeo. But in the Capulet and Montague tragedy, the lovers could not reconcile their families and receive their blessing. David Ludwig took decisive action. He called Kara's home asking for a meeting with her father. The young man was very serious and asked his beloved to talk about their upcoming marriage. On November 13, 2005, David Ludwig arrived at the Borden residence for a talk with Michael, the father of his beloved Kara. He announced his love for Kara, their ongoing relationship, and their plans to marry. Michael's response was dismissive. That will never happen. Anticipating such a response and coming prepared, David, fueled by rage, drew a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he was walking towards the front door. Then, David sought out Kara's mother, Catherine, and shot her while she was sitting on a chair. David then searched for Kara in the house, calling out for her, but he couldn't find her. Afterwards, he got into his car and started to drive away when he saw Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car and told David she wanted to go as far away as possible, get married, and start a new life. The young couple fled the city in the boy's red car. But why would a 14-year-old girl run away with a young man who had just shown such brutality? Wasn't she shocked and scared? Both were considered good kids. How did they turn into criminals? Kara Borden was reported missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found deceased. After reviewing surveillance footage, the police followed the trail of the teenagers. The footage also proved that Kara had not resisted but willingly accompanied David. Charges of abducting Kara were dropped against David Ludwig. Alerts were issued across the east as Pennsylvania and Indiana police investigated sightings of the couple heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. Authorities received a tip on Monday morning about a vehicle matching that description parked near a truck stop outside of Fort Wayne. Police headed to the area, but the car was gone. State police were alerted, and patrols spotted the car around noon on I-70 in Belleville. David Ludwig merged onto the interstate, leading them on a 5-mile chase at speeds of 90 to 95 miles per hour on a Tulane highway. State Trooper David Cox, who was involved in the pursuit, described Ludwig as extremely reckless and dangerous at that moment, causing multiple accidents like in an action movie. The saga of the runaway lovers became a top national news story. Television broadcasts showed the capture of the teenage fugitives after the boy had ended the lives of his girlfriend's parents and took her with him. It turned out the lovers planned to escape far away, get married, and start a new life. The district attorney, commenting on the investigation, stated that the earlier abduction charge against the teenager would be dropped, but the charges for the demise of Michael and Catherine Borden would remain. Ludwig and Cara Beth fled together after the incident and were on the run from the authorities for about 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. Cara Beth was not charged with any crime. David Ludwig was detained without bail on charges of ending lives and abduction. Cara Borden was taken into the care of relatives and church members. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, after a high-speed chase ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the demise of the Bordens following a prolonged dispute. 14-year-old Cara Borden faced no charges. On November 16, David Ludwig was extradited back to Pennsylvania after waiving extradition. The failed Romeo confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm. It was a deliberate act. I intended to shoot them if they got in our way, and I did. During the search of the young man's vehicle upon his arrest, no weapons were found. But when police visited Ludwig's home, they discovered 54 firearms. This arsenal belonged to Ludwig's father, a hunter who taught his son how to handle weapons. An 18-minute video from a laptop in his home showed Ludwig discussing plans for an armed invasion of another family's home, showing him bringing weapons into the house, though court documents state they abandoned this plan due to too many cars present. The police declared Cara Borden a victim in the case, yet Ludwig filed court documents claiming surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove she was not abducted. Ludwig did not resist efforts to return him to Pennsylvania. A Pennsylvania judge ordered him held without bail. He was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation. A preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of the young individual responsible for ending 2 adult lives in front of their children was brief, as detailed in court documents. Cara's 13-year-old sister, Caitlin, told investigators that her parents were shot after arguing with David for about an hour. According to court documents, Caitlin saw Ludwig shoot her father, then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, presumably the one that took her mother's life. Ludwig then ran through the house calling for Cara, she told investigators. The couple's 9-year-old son ran to neighbors who called 911, reporting the tragic event. In June 2006, David Ludwig entered a plea agreement with District Attorney Donald R. Totaro, who had sought the death penalty as punishment. Thus, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree perpetrating, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years, and was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Cara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by a legal counsel. In written statements published on November 22, 2005, the abduction charge against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Cara Borden left with Ludwig of her own free will. Ludwig's lawyer reportedly stated that Cara voluntarily accompanied David during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance recordings show that Borden had ample opportunity to escape. Cara admitted that she ran after Ludwig as he left her house. Cara Borden simply wished to marry her beloved, David Ludwig. Cara Beth has been identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and thus the District Attorney of Lancaster County did not levy any criminal charges against her. Her actions, alongside Ludwig's during the investigation and the digital trail of emails, blogs, and texts they left behind, contributed to this decision. At a solemn memorial service held at Lancaster Bible College, Cara Beth, amidst her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. The Borden family's neighborhood showed its respect and remembrance by adorning mailboxes with white ribbons. The loss left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. George Landis, an elder from the Monterey Chapel, reflected on the incident by saying that the purpose behind such loss is known only to God, reassuring that Mike and Katie are in a better place. Vera Zimmerman, 50, familiar with the Borden family and Ludwig's mother for 7 years, remarked on the upbringing of the children, pointing out that a lapse in judgment led to the unfortunate events. Friends and neighbors recalled Kara Borden as a joyful and sociable young girl, known for her babysitting in the neighborhood and her passion for soccer. Kevin Eshelman, executive pastor at Ephrata Community Church, noted her regular participation in youth group activities. However, underlying tensions between Kara and her parents were noted by Zimmerman, highlighting concerns over Kara's interest in boys. Samuel P. Lohr, a friend of Ludwig, disclosed to authorities their secret intimate relationship, marked by flirtatious electronic communications and inappropriate image exchanges, according to legal documents. Zimmerman mentioned a significant decision by Kara's parents to disconnect her internet service in response to her relationship with David, indicating their disapproval. The peaceful town was left in shock by the grim events that unfolded, resonating beyond the local community to wider circles, especially those involved in homeschooling. Friends of the family struggled to comprehend how such sheltered children could commit acts of grave severity. Officially, they weren't considered a couple due to parental disapproval of their relationship, shared Stephanie Mammon, a 16-year-old neighbor of the Borden family. This incident underscores the dilemma where David Ludwig, faced with opposition, chose violence as a solution to his problems. David G. Ludwig's appeal for release was ultimately denied by the state appellate court, as announced by the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office. Following his sentencing on June 20th, Ludwig underwent various assessments at Tamp Hill before being moved to a state prison in Indiana County to start serving his life sentence for the taking the life of his girlfriend's parents. David Ludwig, at 19, was transferred on August 3rd to the State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove, announced by Susan Norton, spokesperson for the State Department of Corrections. The state chose the Indiana State Prison for Ludwig because of its youthful offender program, designed for inmates aged 15 to 20. The program aims to teach self-responsibility, discipline, respect for others, and self-worth. According to the Department of Corrections, Pine Grove, opened in 2000, houses some of the state's most challenging young offenders in a therapeutic community setting. Inmates at Pine Grove start their day at 6:10 a.m. with a roll call, followed by a 6:30 a.m. workout session including squats, push-ups, and jogging in place. They return to their cells at 7:15 a.m. to get ready for breakfast at 7:30 a.m., with lunch at 11:30 and dinner at 4:20 p.m. The bulk of the day is filled with 4 hours of educational classes, ranging from culinary arts, business, computer drafting, heating and cooling system installation, to building maintenance, and 4 hours of personal life management skills training. Inmates also participate in the 90-day military-style leadership development program fostering honor, discipline, honesty, and respect. Transitioning from the county jail, where Ludwig earned his high school diploma, to the state correctional facility was a challenge for the young man. Stated Merrill M. Spann, one of Ludwig's attorneys, he will also be amongst young people from the general population and will be able to have visitors. The change was difficult because the county jail was smaller, and he had gotten used to the environment, Spann said. The cost of housing an inmate at Pine Grove, which employs about 430 people, is approximately $120 a day. Mr. Ludwig will be assigned jobs such as janitorial work or food service, and he will engage in daily recreational and educational activities, Norton stated. Inmates can earn between 18 cents to 42 cents an hour working as carpenters, plumbers, cooks, and laborers. The money earned can be used to purchase clothing, footwear, food, and personal items at the prison commissary. Most of the 250 inmates at Pine Grove stay until they turn 22, after which they are transferred to adult prisons to serve the remainder of their sentences. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 consecutive life sentences for shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in their home in November 2005 after they told him he could no longer see their 14-year-old daughter, Kara Borden. In his latest petition, Ludwig referred to alleged issues, including being treated as a juvenile offender serving a life sentence. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling, which found life imprisonment for juvenile offenders to be unconstitutional. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently denied the request, agreeing with Lancaster County Judge David Ashworth, who previously deemed the challenge untimely and unfounded, according to the county prosecutor's office. Ashworth stated that Ludwig does not deserve the same consideration as minors because he was 18 and a half at the time of the tragedies. David Ludwig is currently incarcerated in Luzerne County. Cara Beth Borden, the 14-year-old girlfriend of 18-year-old David Ludwig, who is accused of ending the lives of the Borden parents and fleeing with her to Indiana, has reunited with her family in Pennsylvania. However, as CBS News correspondent Sharon Alfonsi reports, it remains unclear what role Cara Borden may have played in the incident. According to Alfonsi, the police now view Borden as a victim. She has not been arrested, which leaves open the possibility that she played a significant role in the unfolding events. Given her age of 14, there's also speculation about potential charges against Ludwig for involvement with a minor. Warwick Police Chief Richard F. Garipoli Jr. told CBS News, "Cara's upset, she's crying, she's 14 years old, and it seems we forget that. She's devastated. This has completely changed the fabric of our community," a Borden neighbor involved in the memorial service told CBS News. "They were wonderful people, and we'll miss them terribly. It's complete madness, absolute madness," said the Lancaster County, Pennsylvania coroner G. Gary Kirchner. "This isn't a Romeo and Juliet deal. It's much worse." Thus, a decision made in a moment of fury and desperation took 3 lives. Why do we say 3 when there are 2 victims? Having received 2 life sentences, 18-year-old David Ludwig will live out his days in prison, never again to make a choice independently and never to be free again. But is that truly living? The community long remembered this terrible story and couldn't understand how such positive children could so casually commit such evil. Unfortunately, homeschooling didn't prevent this horrific tragedy. Growing up and being educated in a Christian environment didn't stop the cruel act. Perhaps the parents, trusting in God and faith, missed something crucial in raising their children or failed to convey the important lessons of Christian faith effectively. Maybe they weren't fulfilling their parental duties adequately, not having heartfelt conversations with their children or trusting each other enough to prevent their daughters' secret escapes and stop the quest for new experiences. Perhaps it would have been better to allow the children to live without mentioning the Almighty, still sharing with their children the life they themselves had lived at a young age, where there weren't so many restrictions and deprivations. Deciding for the children, parents eventually faced disappointment from the decisions made later on. We can only speculate what might have prevented this tragedy. From all we've learned, one thing is clear. Violence always leads to more violence. When we're taught to live with violence, we become good as long as we're coerced and accepted as part of life. The more we practice, the more we endure, and then use violence to solve our problems. Unfortunately, much of this acceptance of violence comes from Christian homes, but such violence is entirely against Christian teaching. Statistic serial killer Michael Madison, 2 weeks shy of Halloween 1977. Michael Madison was born on October 15th in Cleveland, Ohio. His parents, Diane Madison and John Baldwin, accidentally got pregnant and didn't have much of a relationship at the time of his birth. John Baldwin left Diane to care for their young son and denied being Michael's father. Growing up, Diane's mother had been a sex worker and heroin addict. She grew up in a household full of neglect. Diane's upbringing left her unprepared to care for her young son independently. Shortly after giving birth to her son, Michael, social workers were brought into the home. Diane was allowing her constant stream of boyfriends to punish Michael. When Michael was 2, Diane was found to have forcefully stuffed food down Michael's throat. As a result, the toddler began vomiting uncontrollably. Unsure of what to do, Diane put her screaming son into a tub full of hot water. This caused Michael to cry more. Growing frustrated with her young son, Diane took him out of a bath and beat him with an extension cord. A year later, one of Diane's many boyfriends beat Michael so severely with a bout that the young boy vomited and needed to be hospitalized. In another horrific incident, Michael was beaten so severely by another one of Diane's boyfriends that he lost hearing in one of his ears. After years of abuse, Michael was sent to live with his grandmother, who was still a heroin addict and sex worker. But unfortunately, Michael's horrific childhood wouldn't change. Michael continued to be hospitalized for reasons such as dehydration. The social workers involved in Michael's case would note that he and his half-brother were covered in scratches and bruises. Before Michael reached high school, he had become a familiar face to law enforcement. On several occasions, the teenager had been flogged using lemon. In high school, he received a delinquent charge for inappropriately touching another classmate. The crimes Michael committed as a teenager were nothing like the ones he would go on to commit as an adult. In July 2013, the family of 38-year-old Angela Deskins reported her missing after they hadn't heard from her since June. Deskins was known for disappearing from time to time, so the family didn't think much of it. A month after she went missing, her body was discovered wrapped in electrical cords with a belt around her neck. 28-year-old Shadeshaw Sheely was reported missing in September 2012 when she didn't show up at her mother's house. Sheely, along with her 12-year-old daughter, were living with extended family at the time, and Sheely was supposed to stop by her mother's house to borrow some money, but she never showed. Her body was found in July 2013 inside a plastic garbage bag. After returning home from her job at an elementary school, 18-year-old Sherelda Terry disappeared. Her body was also found inside a black trash bag. On July 19, 2013, Michael's neighbors called the police to report a horrible smell coming from a garage near his second-floor apartment building. Inside the garage, the police discovered the decomposing body of a woman. During the police search of the surrounding area, including other vacant homes and backyards, the police found the bodies of 2 more women. Each was wrapped in plastic bags and located approximately 200 yards apart. The police were granted a search warrant for Michael's home, and inside they found further evidence of decomposition. Now the search was on to find where Michael Madison was. The police tracked him down to his mother's house. When they arrived, Michael refused to come out, resulting in a several-hour-long standoff between him and the police before he finally agreed to come out and was taken into police custody. Michael never once showed remorse to the victims' families during the trial. Michael laughed, smiled, and taunted the families. During Sherelda Terry's father's victim impact statement, Michael smiled at the distraught father. This set Terry's father off, and he tried to attack Michael, but was quickly stopped. Michael didn't stop smiling once during the altercation. The jury deliberated less than a day before Michael Madison was found guilty of all 3 murders. He was also found guilty of 3 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of gross abuse of a corpse, 1 count of rape, and 1 count of weapons possession by an ex-convict. On May 20, 2016, Michael was sentenced to death, a sentence he would attempt to appeal a month later. On July 21, 2020, the Ohio Supreme Court voted unanimously to uphold the death sentence for Michael Madison. Killer Ronald O'Brien. Children are cautioned from an early age not to accept candy from strangers. While this golden rule is strictly enforced by vigilant parents throughout the year, on Halloween night, they throw caution to the wind and allow their little ones to go door to door asking for treats. In most instances, their request is granted without worry. Even so, once in a while, the monsters that lurk in the shadows take advantage of the occasion, resulting in dire consequences for the most innocent among us. In 1974, a boy in Pasadena, Texas fell victim to just such a predator when he became violently ill after indulging in a treat from his Halloween bag. Ever the concerned parent, his father had stayed by his side during the hour-long ordeal, offering comfort to the youngster as he convulsed on the bathroom floor. Only 8 years old at the time, Timothy O'Brien died later that night on his way to the hospital. In a shocking turn of events, an autopsy revealed that he had ingested enough potassium cyanide to kill 2 grown men. As difficult as it was to believe, all signs pointed to the fact that someone had deliberately laced candy with a colorless compound before randomly handing it out to unsuspecting children. Investigators were convinced that a cold-blooded killer was hiding somewhere in the suburbs of Houston, and they intended to find him. With no suspects in mind and little evidence to go on, detectives theorized that an unscrupulous person who was angry at the world in general had decided to take the life of a complete stranger, a child no less, as a way of getting back at society. To make a difficult situation even worse, there was no telling how many children have received the tainted sweets. Although authorities had put out an emergency news bulletin requesting that all Halloween candy be brought to the police station for inspection, they feared that there would be other victims before all was said and done. While they faced an uphill battle, to be sure, investigators did have a few things working in their favor. For one, it had been raining heavily on the evening of Trick or Treat, which had limited the number of houses that Timothy and his sister Elizabeth had visited. More importantly, a chemical analysis of the contents of the boys' tree bank had enabled them to pinpoint the carrier of the poison. Lab tests revealed that the killer's lethal weapon of choice had been the sweet and sour powder contained inside of straw-shaped pixie sticks. After meeting with the residents of the houses where the O'Brien children were known to have gotten candy, detectives were confident that none of them had given up pixie sticks. However, during the course of their interviews, they learned that someone had been witnessed doling out that particular treat, and that someone had been Timothy's father, Ronald O'Brien. When he was brought in for questioning, O'Brien claimed that a man he had never seen before had emerged from a darkened home and given him several pixie sticks to hand out on his behalf. He added that, after consuming a small amount of the sugary powder, Timothy had complained that it tasted funny. Instead of telling him to throw it out, he had given his son a soft drink to help wash it down. Under the pretense of helping police solve the case, he had readily provided them with the address of the house where the exchange had taken place. Upon speaking with the mystery man, who turned out to be an air traffic controller named Courtney Melvin, officers learned that he had an alibi for the night in question. According to him, he had been at work and had not returned home until well after midnight. When they visited his place of employment, his supervisor confirmed his story and had the paperwork to prove it. In a stunning show of support, 200 of Melvin's coworkers came forward to vouch for his character. Realizing that they had been duped, investigators quickly concluded that this man was not their killer, something that Ronald O'Brien had known all along. A bit of digging into his past uncovered that Ronald O'Brien, who had trained as an optician, was not nearly as respectable as he wanted others to believe. I'm not content who couldn't hold a job, he was drowning in a sea of debt. Not above taking what he wanted, he had been accused of stealing on numerous occasions, usually by former employers. While being shiftless and prone to theft doesn't necessarily mean that someone is capable of murder, the fact that O'Brien had taken out hefty life insurance policies, not one but 3, on his children in the months prior to his son's untimely death moved him to the top of the list of suspects. Another nail in O'Brien's self-constructed coffin came when it was discovered that he had phoned the insurance company on the morning after his son's death, inquiring about a payout. As the 8-year-old's body lay in the icy morgue, his father's only concern had been how quickly the money he had coming would change hands. On November 5, 1974, less than a week after Timothy was poisoned, Ronald O'Brien was taken into custody and formally charged with 1 count of murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. To no one's surprise, he pleaded not guilty across the board. He would steadfastly maintain his innocence throughout the trial, despite the damning evidence against him. During the proceedings, a parade of witnesses testified that O'Brien had become fixated on the properties of cyanide in the months leading up to his son's murder. His obsession led him to presumably ask friends and family alike if they knew where he could purchase the deadly poison. He would also inquire of them if they had any idea how much of the substance it would take to kill a person. In June of 1975, 8 months after little Timothy O'Brien had been laid to rest, his father was convicted of his murder. He was also found guilty in the attempted poisonings of the other 4 children, none of whom had ingested the legal powder. For his crimes, Ronald O'Brien, whom the press had dubbed the Candyman, was condemned to the electric chair. Down the road, as alternative methods of execution were introduced, his punishment was amended to a more humane death by lethal injection. It had taken the jury just over an hour to decide the fate of the man who had so callously plotted and carry up the murder of someone who had trusted him implicitly. Once the verdict was in, the waiting game began. As it happened, 9 years would pass more time than Timothy had spent on this earth before his tiller would face flammable justice. During his time on death row, O'Brien was reviled by his fellow inmates who, despite their own misdeeds, considered him to be lower than a snake's belly. Their hatred of the child killer ran so deep that they had thrown a party on the day of his demise to let him know that he would not be missed. After several days of execution, O'Brien was put to death on March 31, 1984, at the age of 39. When asked if he had any last words, he had taken the opportunity to rail against the system that had allowed him to come to such an end. When his death was announced over the loudspeaker, hundreds of people who had gathered outside the prison to celebrate the attention had shouted trick or treat while throwing handfuls of candy in the air in remembrance of Timothy, a young boy who had paid the ultimate price for his father's greed. Todd Allen Reed, the Forest Park tiller. The bodies of 3 women were found in the same stretch of parkland, all within a month of each other. It was not long before police had their man. But is he responsible for more than the 3 murders they convicted him for? 32-year-old Todd Allen Reed was already a registered sex offender when he strangled to death at least 3 women before dunking their naked bodies in Forest Park, a heavily wooded area just west of Portland, Oregon. From 1992 to 1995, he had served a measly 2.5 years of a 12-year sentence for the sexual assault of Shelley Harding, who was 7 months pregnant at the time of his cowardly attack. She had been walking home from work when he approached her and forced her into his car at knife point. Reed was involved to him and fled the scene of a minor crash with another vehicle on his way to the secluded spot where he sexually assaulted Shelley. After he had assaulted her, he attempted to strangle her with a seat belt and began to cry. Shelley was strong and she was calm. She had been talking to Reed constantly, like he was a friend, almost building a rapport. Whilst doing so, she made sure to leave as much physical evidence as she could, touching every surface to leave as many of her prints as possible. Whatever this monster was going to do to her, she wasn't going to make it easy for him to get away with. When Reed broke down, she used this to her advantage, and her pleas to be let go and her promises that she would not tell anyone worked. Reed let her go. Not only did Shelley report her abduction and assault, the 2 men that had been in the car that Reed had crashed into also reported the hit and run. They even had his license plate. Reed pleaded no contest and was handed the 12-year sentence. He was registered as a sex offender and, crucially, his DNA was taken and stored in the state crime lab. This would be the golden ticket police needed to catch the Forest Park serial killer 7 years later. Reed was released early as he had built up sentence-reducing credits, half of which were for good behavior. At roughly 8 miles long and 5,100 acres, Forest Park is one of the largest urban forest reserves in the USA, ranked 19th to be more precise. It is not easy to wander from the 70 miles of trails to the park's dense vegetation. To highlight just how secluded this park can get, once you're off trail, in 2004, a 53-year-old man called Frank and his 12-year-old daughter Ruth were discovered to be living off-grid in the park. They had been there for 4 years, completely undetected. On May 7, 1999, a couple walking their dog on one of the park's more and more trails would come across the body of 28-year-old Wella Faye Mahler. She was naked and face down, entangled in thick blackberry brambles. She had been strangled, and it was determined that her body had been there for around 2 months. Police would find a used condom merely 28 feet from her body. They were able to extract DNA from this vital piece of evidence. The next day, May 8th, police themselves would discover a second body whilst they were searching the immediate area. The body of 26-year-old Stephanie Lynn Mussel was found around a quarter of a mile away from where Lilla had been discovered. She too was found naked and had been strangled. Tests would determine she had been left there less than a week before she was found. They would also recover traces of DNA on her thighs. A group of hikers would find the third body, that of 18-year-old Alexandria Eisen, in the early evening of June 2nd. Alexandria had been reported missing sometime in May. Police were unable to reach her body until the next day due to the location. She'd been dumped down an extremely steep slope just off of a deer path. She was found naked, and she too had been strangled. Her body was around 1/4 of a mile away from Lilla and Stephanie's. After the discovery of Alexandria's body, Police Chief Charles Moves admitted that investigators had concluded they were looking for a serial killer due to the similarities of the crimes. Physically, all 3 women resembled each other, but they also had very similar life experiences. They were all homeless at the time of their deaths and had cocaine and heroin addictions, although Stephanie had just completed a detox program before her murder. Lilla and Alexandria had been at some point engaged in prostitution to pay for these addictions. All 3 women were known to frequent West Burnside Street. It's also been claimed that Lilla and Stephanie knew each other, although this has not been proven either way. It was determined that all 3 of the women had been murdered elsewhere, and their bodies were taken to Forest Park afterwards. Toxicology all showed that they had taken heroin sometime before their deaths. The police response was immediate, and it was impressive. A specialist task force consisting of 16 individuals was formed, and they set about scouting bars, reaching out and offering protection to the community being targeted, and 30 additional beds were made available for homeless women during the investigation. Although residents were not happy about the lack of information they were receiving, the police kept their investigation tightly under wraps. Such was their determination to catch this killer. The task force would use the physical similarities of the 3 women to their advantage. A female officer of a similar appearance posed as a prostitute in West Burnside Street to see if they could reel the killer in, and sure enough, retook the bait. On the July 7th, the same day a vigil was being held for Lila, Stephanie, and Alexandria, Reed approached the undercover officer, and it was not long before his suspicious behavior flagged him to police. At about 5:20 a.m., he was approached by a member of the lookout team, Sergeant John Botchlet. Greg readily admitted that he was a sex offender and agreed to a search of his vehicle. They found an unused condom, a book entitled The Killing Gift, about a woman who can kill men by merely looking at them, and some yellow strapping. There was nothing incriminating to be found, and the police had to let him go. He was not the hook, however, far from it. Another lookout that night, Detective Sergeant Dave Schlegel, recognized him from the 1992 sexual assault case. He had in fact been the arresting officer. Police began 24-hour surveillance of Reed, both at his home and at his place of work. At least once during this surveillance, he was observed driving in circles around West Burnside and Sandy Boulevard. The police lab results came back and confirmed that the DNA from the condom that the Moore crime scene and the DNA found on Stephanie's thighs matched the DNA that was on file for Todd Allen Reed. At around 7:30 p.m. on July 18th, after Reed had left for work, police executed a search warrant at his address where he lived with his girlfriend. Once the police had left the premises, his girlfriend phoned him to let him know the police had been there. He attempted to make a getaway in the middle of his shift, but it was too late. The police had already arrived. At 11:30 p.m. on July 18th, 11 days after police had questioned him and only 1.5 months after the task force was set up, Reed was arrested outside of Ranella Produce, the warehouse where he worked night shifts, unloading the delivery trucks. On July 27th, he was indicted on 7 criminal counts in relation to 3 homicides. It emerged that Reed, who had been ordered to serve 8 years post-prison supervision, had actually been kicked out of a sex offender treatment program 2 weeks before his arrest for failure to attend. On February 23, 2001, he pleaded guilty and received 3 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Reed had been facing the death penalty, but his plea deal took this off of the table. Reed is also the prime suspect in 2, possibly 3, other murders in the Portland area. The cases being referred to by Reed are the 1987 cold case murders of 15-year-old Jennifer Lynch and 12-year-old Mendy Colleen Thomas, and the 1999 disappearance of 19-year-old Amava Sines. In regards to the murders, Gresham Police Sergeant David Lerwick has been quoted as saying, "Although we suspect that he was the person who killed both those girls, we didn't have enough evidence to convict him." Jennifer had gone missing on July 3, 1987, and her skeletal remains was found on July 8, 1988. Mindy went missing from the apartment complex where she lived on August 3, 1987, and her body was discovered on October 4, 1988. Both of the children had been strangled and dumped in wooded areas on the eastern side of Gresham, about 3 miles apart, and they were both last seen in the company of Gail Bennett, Reed's then girlfriend and later wife. They married in 1988 and divorced in 1997. Gresham Police said Bennett, who has a police record of her own, might have information about the killings, but has been uncooperative. Bennett has denied any knowledge. At the time, police were operating under the assumption that they had both been killed by the same man, and that this man was known to them. They had questioned Reed at the time of the investigation, due to the fact they had both been seen with Gail, but he was never charged or arrested. Police renewed efforts to solve the Gresham cases after his arrest in the Portland killings, but attempts to compare DNA from the old crimes with Reed's DNA have been inconclusive. Alma the witness seen on June 30, 1999, and has not been seen since. She was working as a prostitute at the time of her disappearance, and it has been claimed she knew / was friends with Alexandria Eisen. No charges have been brought forward in her case, although it is impossible to downplay the likelihood that he had something to do with Alma the disappearance. As of June 2020, what prison Reed is in is not known, and as of June 2021, he was no longer listed as an inmate and may be dead. 40 years ago, an American teenager was found bludgeoned to death in a cemetery in New Jersey. Her face was so badly injured that it was impossible to identify her at the time. The American public began to refer to her as Princess Doe, the Jane Doe who had died too young. For 4 decades, her real name has been a mystery until now. Hi and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael, and today's episode, I'm going to take you guys through the story of how Princess Doe was killed, how her identity was revealed, and how her killer was finally caught. Let's get right into it. Princess Doe was a previously unidentified American teenager from West Babylon, New York. She was found murdered in Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown, New Jersey on the 15th of July, 1982. Her face had been bludgeoned beyond recognition. Her case gained national attention, and the public took a special interest in unraveling her story and finding answers. She became the first unidentified dead body to be entered into the National Crime Information Center. On the morning of Thursday, July 15, 1982 at around 8 a.m., gravedigger George Keese discovered the body of a young girl in the rear section of the Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown, New Jersey. The body was found lying on its back, just over a steep bank that leads to a creek below. The victim's face had been beaten beyond recognition with a yet-to-be-determined object. Due to the significant decomposition of her body, even her eye color could not be confirmed. The young girl was dressed in a red short-sleeve shirt. A peasant-style skirt was found lying on top of the victim's legs. No footwear or undergarments were found. No conclusive evidence was found, but this was difficult to determine because of how much the body was decayed. A golden cross necklace was found tangled in the victim's hair. 2 earrings were found in her left ear. Red nail polish was found on the right hand only, and she had no surgical scars, distinct birthmarks, or tattoos. Scars or marks on the head or face area could not be known due to the condition of the body. Forensic anthropologists determined that the victim was not pregnant and had never given birth, and was most likely between the ages of 18 and 14 years old at the time of her death. Toxicology did not reveal any traces of drugs, but was not entirely conclusive because of the time elapsed between the death and the discovery of the body. It is believed that the body was discovered after 2 to 3 days, or possibly even weeks, of exposure to the elements. This was especially difficult to determine because of the hot and humid weather in the area at that time. The forensic examination indicated that the girl had attempted to fight back or defend herself from her attacker, as injuries indicating trauma to her hands and arms were visible. The girl's body was buried in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery, not far from where she was discovered in January 1983. Donated funds were used to pay for the victim's coffin and headstone. The headstone was engraved with the text, "Princess Doe, missing from home, dead among strangers, remembered by all." For many years, Princess Doe was thought to be Diane Janice Guy, a missing teenager from San Jose, California, who vanished on July 30, 1979. This theory was propagated by several law enforcement officials in the state of New Jersey, who went as far as to hold a press conference identifying Diane Guy as Princess Doe. However, Lieutenant Eric Krantz, the Princess Doe case's original lead investigator, maintained that Diane Guy was not a viable candidate for Princess Doe's identity. Krantz's feelings were shared by Diane's family and investigators in California, who were particularly angered by the conduct of the New Jersey law enforcement. In 2003, Princess Doe's DNA was compared with a DNA sample from Diane's mother, Patricia, and it was conclusively determined that Princess Doe was not Diane Guy. After seeing images of the girl's clothing in the newspaper, a witness named Amory Latimer reported to officials that she remembered seeing a girl wearing the same clothing as Princess Doe purchasing cigarettes on July 13, 1982, just 2 days before her body was found. Latimer stated that she was shopping with her daughter at a supermarket across from the cemetery and observed, and was able to describe the victim's clothing. The shirt and skirt themselves were traced to a manufacturer in the Midwestern United States, although the brand labels were missing. 3 people reported after viewing the photos that they had bought similar clothes at a Long Island store, which is now closed. On September 22, 1999, the body of Princess Doe was exhumed from the Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown so that DNA samples could be taken. The body was reburied in the same location. After a 2012 photo composite of the victim was released, it generated new tips, as it resembled several missing girls from across the country. One theory was submitted that Princess Doe may have been a runaway and could have been an individual using false names while employed at a hotel in Ocean City, Maryland. In 2012, a sample of her hair and a tooth were examined through isotope analysis and indicated that the victim was most likely born in the United States, at least 7 to 10 months in the Midwestern or Northeastern United States. The tooth sample indicated she could be from Arizona. It is also believed that the girl had spent a long time in Long Island, New York. Lieutenant Krams, now retired, coined the name Princess Doe early in the investigations and also managed to get the case covered extensively in the media. The case was used as the impetus for recording unidentified crime victims in the MCIC database at the national level. Princess Doe became the first such case entered by the FBI director. After extensive print media coverage in 1982, Lieutenant Krams, who was the original lead investigator from the Blairstown Police Department, was contacted by HBO regarding the Princess Doe case and asked if the channel could chronicle the case in an upcoming documentary entitled Missing. Krams agreed, and the segment was filmed over several weeks. Krams was shown following leads as they came in. The documentary featured actual footage of the recovery of Princess Doe's body, along with footage shot by HBO of Princess Doe's 1983 funeral. The case was also featured on America's Most Wanted in 2012 in hopes of generating new information about the case. The same year, the most recent reconstruction was broadcast on CNN. On July 15, 2012, a memorial service was held for the 30th anniversary of Princess Doe being discovered at the top of the ravine where her remains were found. Over 100 citizens attended, as well as several reporters and cameras. The victim's clothing as well as her photo reconstructions were on display for public viewing. On October 12, 2014, Princess Doe was honored at a missing persons rally in the area. In the years between the first discovery in the body and the final identification, several theories cropped up. The first one was that Princess Doe was actually Diane Dye, a young girl missing from California, which has now been definitively disproved. Secondly, the killer of Princess Doe was already in prison for another homicide. A man called John Reese was briefly suspected as he was convicted of killing another woman in nearby Belvedere, New Jersey, but there was no real evidence of a connection with Princess Doe. The third theory was that Princess Doe was either a runaway that was known to work in the Ocean City, Maryland area, or a prostitute who worked at the local truck stop. The information for these two possibilities was highly inconclusive. Nobody from the local area came forward to identify Princess Doe on or off the record. It seems unlikely that not one single person would come forward if she was known in the area. The fourth and disturbing theory was that Princess Doe was killed by a Blairstown police officer, and that is why the case was never solved. But this claim is completely unsubstantiated. There are retired local law enforcement officers who still follow and contribute to the case, even after 40 years. The fifth theory was that Princess Doe was a victim of a serial killer known to operate in the area, such as John Kleiss, Henry Lee Lucas, or Joel Rifkin. Though local law enforcement was aware of these claims, none were found to be credible. A sixth theory was that Princess Doe was an out-of-state teenager who worked at an area camp. Again, this was never proven. And now we come to the seventh theory, that Princess Doe was killed by a man named Arthur Kinlaw. For many years, this was the most current theory. Many of the facts fit the case, and this theory was explored on the America's Most Wanted website. Several New York Newsday articles referenced this theory that was published in 1999 and 2000. Mr. Kinlaw was already imprisoned for other crimes, but since Princess Doe's body wasn't identified, his involvement in her murder could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Princess Doe's body was re-exhumed in November 2020 using a grant, and she underwent DNA extraction for genetic genealogy. In May 2021, investigators were notified by the NCMEC, or National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who were collaborating with Astria Forensics about obtaining DNA markers from degraded samples of Princess Doe's body using a grant. On June 18, 2021, investigators received the news that Astria Forensic agreed to extract DNA and construct a DNA profile. On February 10, 2022, Astria Forensics relayed to investigators that the creation of a DNA data file was successful. The results were sent to the NCMEC's consulting genealogist from Innovative Forensics Investigations. The managing officer was Jennifer Moore, who agreed to perform unlimited genealogy testing free of charge. On February 22, 2022, Innovative Forensics announced to investigators that they had found a candidate for Princess Doe. Investigators went to West Battle on New York, where they met Robert Olenyok, Jr., Princess Doe's brother. They also collected a DNA sample from Princess Doe's sister, which mitotyping technology used to build a mitochondrial DNA profile. The Union County Prosecutor's Office Forensic Laboratory assisted by creating an STR DNA profile through the victim's sister's DNA sample. Mitotyping technology sent their results to the Union County Prosecutor's Office Forensic Laboratory, then sent both the mitochondrial DNA and STR-DNA profiles to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification. On April 29, 2022, the center identified Princess Doe as Dawn Alagnac. Her identity was formally announced on July 15, 2022, the 40th anniversary of her discovery. Robert Alagnac, Jr., said that Alagnac left their home at her mother's request, and she was never seen or heard from again. Way back in 1999, evidence came to light that Arthur and Donna Kinlaw may have been involved in Princess Doe's murder. Donna was arrested in California for attempting to commit welfare fraud by using the name Eliana, which was traced to a Long Island native. When the police questioned her, she gave them details about the murder of Linda, and her testimony put the Kinlaws behind bars. Donna gave details about 2 murders Arthur had committed of 2 other female victims who remain unidentified today. After Arthur was faced with a death sentence, Donna told authorities that Kinlaw had killed another woman, a sex worker, earlier in 1982. She told police that she was with Arthur in the cemetery and witnessed him commit the murder. Another report states that Donna Kinlaw said that in July 1982, her husband brought home a teenage girl, left home, and returned without her. He later apparently disposed of his clothing and cleaned his vehicle. Afterward, he threatened his wife, claiming if she did not attend her job, he would take her life as he did to the girl he brought home. However, a lack of cooperation meant that Arthur Kinlaw was not charged. Lieutenant Stephen Spears, who worked on the case as a member of the Warren County Prosecutor's Office, from which he is now retired, stated that Kinlaw claimed responsibility for her death, but I have no physical evidence to confirm that, and without the identity of Princess Doe, I have no way of connecting the dots, so to speak, putting her in a place where he could have been or would have been at the same time. Spears also reported that he doubted the confession because the Kinlaws could not provide a name for Princess Doe, even though they claimed to have been with her for some time. Even though he questioned the credibility of their statements, Spears does not believe the victim was native to Long Island, New York. However, Donna Kinlaw was interviewed by a forensic artist who created a sketch of the girl she claimed to have met, which does resemble the most recent composite. Arthur Kinlaw remained incarcerated for 2 counts of second-degree murder. Following the 2022 investigation of Princess Doe as Dawn Alagnac, Arthur Kinlaw was reconsidered as a suspect and later charged with Alagnac's murder. Dawn Alagnac was born on August 5, 1964. She had been a junior at Connequot High School in Bohemia, New York, where she had lived with her mother and sister, authorities said. But she soon moved out of the family home. According to her brother, she was thrown out of her home by her mom. She ended up getting killed in a cemetery, leaving no clue as to her real identity. But for more than 20 years, the name of her suspected killer was no secret. In 1999, the wife of Arthur Kinlaw, the convicted pimp who today is serving time for the murder of many other Long Island women, tied her husband not only to those deaths, but to the brutal slaying of the girl in the Blairstown Cemetery. In an interview with Newsday at the time, Donna Kinlaw recounted how her husband, in the summer of 1982, brought a girl of about 18 years old back to their Central Islip home. She told the newspaper as well as police that her husband left with the woman, but later returned home alone, appearing shaken. About 2 weeks later, according to Newsday, she read that police in Belvedere, New Jersey, had found a body of a dead girl who fit the description of the girl who was in their house that night. He kept saying, "What does it say? What does it say? Does it say who the person was who got killed?" She said her husband asked. From the story she read aloud to her husband, Donna Kinlaw told Newsday that she remembered that the New Jersey police named the dead girl Princess Jane Doe. Not long afterward, investigators exhumed her body to recover the murder victim's femur bone, in hopes of using her DNA to identify her. And in fact, investigators acknowledged that Arthur Kinlaw confessed to the New Jersey murder in written statements dating back to 2005. But it was not until April of this year that Dawn Alagnac was positively identified. Arthur Kinlaw, now 68, is currently imprisoned in Sullivan County, New York, on 2 other first-degree murder convictions from 2000. Among them was a teenager he knew only as Linda in April 1984 in the Bronx, Newsday reported. "I strangled her with my hands," said Kinlaw. "She was hit about the head by me with a bat." Arthur Kinlaw has now been charged with 1 count of homicide as the result of the subsequent investigation, witness statements, and his confession of Alagnac's murder. It is believed that after Dawn Alagnac refused his demands to go into prostitution, he drove her to New Jersey. They both ended up in Blairstown, where Kinlaw murdered her in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery. Neither Olenet nor Kinlaw had a connection with the town. Kinlaw remains imprisoned at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. Investigators are now looking to piece together Dawn Olenet's movements in the time leading up to her death. The DNA Doe Project, also DNA Doe Project Incorporated or DDP, is an American nonprofit volunteer organization formed to identify unidentified deceased persons, more commonly known as John or Jane Doe, by using forensic genealogy. Their volunteers identified victims of automobile accidents, homicides, and unusual circumstances, such as persons who committed suicide under an alias. The group was founded in 2017 by Colleen Fitzpatrick and Margaret Press. Unraveling the mystery of Princess Doe has been a sensational success for genealogical DNA testing of exactly this kind. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest impact, and for the case of Princess Doe, that was exactly what happened. A molar root weighing just 200 kilograms would hold the answers that had eluded investigators for close to 40 years. With the help of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Princess Doe's molar and eyelash were submitted to Astrea Forensics in 2021 for possible DNA extraction. What is so special about Astrea is that they can extract DNA from samples that are degraded or otherwise would provide no value, said Carol Schweitzer, a forensic supervisor at NCMEC. We knew that if anyone could get the information that was needed, Astrea could, and they did. Kelly Kincaid, CEO of Astrea Forensics, told NCMEC that they were lucky to find that the DNA was exceptionally well preserved and allowed for millions of pieces of information to be gathered to complete the DNA profile. This single DNA extract contained hundreds of millions of unique human DNA fragments, said Kelly. With these sequencing data, we were able to reconstruct her whole genome single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SMP profile. This resulted in Astrea being able to deliver genotype files to NCMEC and the Warren County Prosecutor's Office that could go on and be used to complete Princess Doe's genealogy. This technology, that would not have been possible 40 years ago, was just the break the investigators had been hoping for to identify Princess Doe's identity. Once Astrea finished the sequencing, Innovative Forensic Investigations, or IFI, started to work on investigative genetic genealogy techniques to build a family tree that would ultimately lead to the true identity of Princess Doe, or who we now know as Dawn Olenet. This work was only possible because of the collaborative effort of each agency, said Jennifer Moore, CEO of IFI. Our team brings forward a diverse set of skills that allows us to help find answers to cases. Echoing Moore's sentiment in today's press conference, Prosecutor Pfeiffer reiterated that science and technology made the impossible possible in this case. Dawn's case was deeply personal for the investigators involved, and their push for answers and justice never wavered. Dawn's family expressed deep gratitude to everyone who worked to find answers in Dawn's case. "This is a very big deal for my family," said Dawn's cousin. "I'd like to thank Blairstown for treating my cousin like she was one of their own. It touches our family deeply. My cousin is always in my heart," he said while tapping the photo of Dawn pinned to his chest. "Blairstown gave it their all, and we were greatly appreciative of that." Since Princess Doe was the first unidentified persons case to be entered into NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, by the director of the FBI, William Webster, on June 30, 1983, this was a historic moment for missing and unidentified persons that has continued to play a crucial role in investigations since. The entry in NCIC has remained current and alive until today, when she will be removed. The tenacity of law enforcement has never stopped, and they continue to pour resources and new technology into solving this case. And it's thanks to the collaboration between police authorities and genealogical DNA testing experts that Princess Doe was publicly identified on the 40th anniversary of the discovery of her body as Dawn Olenet. So, what do you guys think about this 40-year-old case finally getting resolved? Do you still have any theories about Princess Doe? Let us know in the comments section. In the early hours of July 7, 1985, 54-year-old Jane Anchor Hilton was found beaten and stabbed to death. She was discovered in a bedroom at her employer's house, a house she moved into only the previous day, seeking refuge from a troubled marriage. Jane was discovered by two fellow housemates and her own daughter, Autumn. The murder made no sense, and the case dragged for 14 years until two new detectives reopened the cold case in 1999. A misquote in an article led investigators to point the finger at Ricky Davis. Davis was eventually tried for the crime and convicted, all the while proclaiming his innocence. Determined not to give up, he sought help from the same justice system that put him behind bars. 15 years later, Davis was exonerated and the real killer found, thanks to genetic genealogy testing and the determination of a group called the Innocence Project, who were determined to find the truth. Jane was a familiar face around El Dorado Hills, California. She was a columnist for Foothill Times. She often covered social events in and around town for the paper. Jane had 6 children whom she loved, and often wrote poetry to help inspire them daily. She'd been working toward getting her real estate license and was married to Archie Hilton in 1984. However, by July 1985, their marriage started to fall apart. It was then she asked her employer, Wilma Klein, for assistance. Klein owned a fairly large home in El Dorado Hills. With her lived her daughter, Maureen Klein, and her boyfriend. Wilma's grandson, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, also occupied a room at the house. On July 6, 1985, Wilma welcomed Jane and her youngest daughter, 13-year-old Autumn Anchor, into her home. By all accounts, it was a full house. The first night of her new life would prove to be the night her life ended. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, then 20, and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Connie Dahl, returned from a party to find Autumn lingering about outside. She told them she was out late and afraid her mother was going to be angry. All 3 made their way into the house. There was blood in the hallway. It was silent as they reached the first room, belonging to Maureen, Ricky's mother. On the bed was the bloody body of Jane Hilton. She was not breathing. Maureen and her boyfriend had gone on a camping trip and were not home at the time. Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had suffered 29 stab wounds, was beaten and bitten on her shoulder. It was a senseless murder, and investigators began to interview those closest to Jane. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was interviewed and provided detectives with a solid alibi and DNA. Archie had been the logical choice as he and Jane had been going through a rough patch. He, however, said that the marriage was not over and that there was no trouble between them. He was cleared and all leaves went cold. Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl both told investigators they arrived home in the early morning hours and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet bloody. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom, where they found Jane lying dead on the bloodied mattress. They speculated that an intruder may have been responsible for the murder. For 14 years, the case remained unsolved. The cold case reopened in 1999. El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald retest with the investigation. After poring over paperwork, they zoomed in on a news article. Connie Dahl, former girlfriend of Ricky Davis and housemate of Jane Hilton, had given an interview to a reporter. She was quoted saying, "Hilton's body was lying in bed like someone placed her there in the position she would normally sleep in." This statement seemed to contradict a muffled audio recording of a statement that Davis had previously made. Detective Fitzgerald falsely thought he heard him say the body was found on the floor. Dahl was, at the time, serving a jail sentence in Oregon on unrelated charges. Detectives brought her in for an interview and began a 3-hour-long interrogation. Initially, Dahl stuck to her original story. Over the next 18 months, though, she would be interrogated 4 times. Detectives were found to have used techniques known to increase the chances of a false confession. Dahl was systematically forced into incriminating Davis and Jane's daughter Autumn in the murder. Dahl was threatened with the charge of murder. If she cooperated, though, she would be given a lenient sentence of manslaughter and serve only a year. Detective Strasser and Fitzgerald told Dahl that DNA evidence was going to be used to trace the suspect. In truth, no DNA evidence was brought into the case during that period. In truth, testing had not been done on the DNA recovered from the scene. By showing a crime scene photos and using facts from the crime, such as the bike mark on Jane's shoulder, investigators fed Dahl the information they wanted to hear. Over the course of the 4 interviews, Dahl was starting to break. She began remembering facts from the crime. This, in turn, allowed her to fabricate and create an entirely different account of events from the night of the murder. In one interview, Dahl said that Autumn was present during the murder of Jane and was sprayed with blood. In another, she confessed that she was probably the person that bit Jane on the shoulder. Dahl would say that the murder began with an argument between Davis and Jane. She alleged that Davis wanted Autumn to join them in a party. When Jane refused, Davis erupted in a fit of anger, leading to the death of Jane. Her story kept changing to fit the facts being fed. However, she couldn't remember the weapon used for the murder or where it was eventually hidden. Dahl had implicated her ex-boyfriend Davis in the murder of Jane Hilton. He was now the prime suspect. Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker were also interviewed following the confession of Connie Dahl. Both Davis and Anker stuck to their original accounts of the crime. Detectives again lied to Davis, telling him that Anker had also implicated him in the murder. Anker told detectives she had no reason to protect Davis when they threatened her with culpability regarding the murder. Despite their interrogation techniques, detectives could not sway Davis or Anker to change their stories. They therefore used the confession of Dahl to arrest Davis. Dahl was offered a plea bargain to testify against Davis at his trial. Davis's first trial was declared a mistrial by jurors. His second in 2005 would eventually convict him. Dahl took the stand and testified against Davis. She told the court of how she struggled with Jane, and she herself accidentally bit the victim on the shoulder. She went on to say that she went outside as Davis continued the bloody assault on Hilton. Dahl said she could hear screaming, pleading, and gurgling as Davis continued the brutal attack. Based entirely on the testimony of Dahl's account of events, Davis was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the second-degree murder of Jane Hilton. Dahl received a lesser charge of manslaughter and received a year-long sentence of the county jail. Dahl, though, would eventually die from a drug overdose in 2014. Meanwhile, Davis was not going down without a fight. He maintained his innocence and in 2006 made contact with the Northern California Innocence Project. He asked if they could help him prove that he was wrongly convicted. The NCP was founded in 2001 by Kathleen Ridolfi and Linda Starr. The project began after legislation offered convicted inmates to seek DNA testing to prove their innocence. It's a non-profit clinical program of Santa Clara University's School of Law. After Davis made contact with the NCP in 2006, his case was put through a thorough re-examination. Cooperation between the NCP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office allowed for the DNA recovered from the crime scene to be retested post-conviction. Evidence from the crime scene included Hilton's naked gown and biological material found under her fingernails. The results revealed an unknown male DNA profile. DNA from Hilton's fingernails and the naked gown were both found to be from the same source. Test results eliminated Davis, Dahl, and Anker. This proved Dahl's testimony was contradictory to the physical evidence and therefore had to have been fabricated. The DNA also proved Archie Hilton innocent. Unfortunately, he had passed away by the time results were released. The DNA profile file was entered into the FBI Combined Index DNA System, CODIS, but no matches were found. Although the evidence seemed to prove Davis's consistent claim of innocence correct, there were some hurdles that still needed to be jumped. The NCIP successfully argued that had the DNA results been presented to the jury during Davis's trial, the outcome would be different. However, until January 2017, the California standard required that new evidence point unerringly to innocence. It was considered an almost unattainable standard. In 2015, a false confession expert, Richard Leo, reviewed transcripts of Dahl's interrogations. Leo concluded that the methods used by detectives during the interrogation of Dahl were designed to pressure and persuade Dahl to adopt an account that matched the detectives' pre-existing beliefs about how and why the murder of Jane Hilton occurred. In 2016, though, the NCIP co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134. This bill allowed wrongfully convicted inmates, like Davis, to prove that new evidence would likely have been compelling to a jury. NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a petition for a new trial based on the new DNA evidence testing. Championed by former California State Senator Martha Leno, the bill was passed in January 2017, putting California's standard in line with that of 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malakian vacated Davis's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. Initially set to start in fall of 2019, however, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020, citing the defense attorney's health as the catalyst for change in date. However, the fate of the trial was about to change once again. Advancements in DNA testing led to Davis becoming the first convicted person in California and the second in the United States to be exonerated for a crime. Genetic genealogy is a fairly new DNA testing concept. It involves taking DNA evidence from a crime scene and sending them to genetic companies. These companies then search foundly treed databases to find their potential match. In February 2020, DNA evidence matched to a man considered an unlikely suspect. El Dorado County Attorney Vern Pearson announced in February 2020 that a new suspect had been identified as the man linked to the DNA evidence found on Jane Hilton's body. Following the arrest, many people spoke to the media about the man they knew as Michael Green. Green was a longtime resident of Roseville, California. He graduated from Oakmount High School in 1986. He was described as an easygoing, kind person, even-tempered, and even super chill. One classmate who wanted to remain anonymous could not understand why Green would go to El Dorado Hills and brutally murder a woman. According to reports, Green was 17 years old at the time of Hilton's murder. On the night of July 6, 1985, the victim's daughter, Autumn, met Green and two of his friends, Calvin and Stephen. They hung out together at the park when Autumn decided to go home and have a shower before returning. Allegedly, Autumn told her mother she was going to another friend's house for the evening. Instead, she returned to the park to join the boys. What happened next is pure speculation. Investigators believe that during this time, Green broke into the house and was confronted by Jane. In a struggle to get away, Green may have attacked her in a frenzy. Following the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Davis, Dahl, and Autumn when they returned home. Green had no criminal convictions either before or after the murder. It seems he'd led a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. The other two boys who were with Green were tracked down shortly after his arrest. Calvin, unfortunately, had died some time ago. Stephen, however, was found and interviewed the day after the arrest. He was being treated as a witness and not a participant. Green was arrested on February 11, 2020. Since Green was a teenager at the time of the murder, he made his first appearance at the juvenile court on February 19, 2020. District Attorney Vern Pearson said that procedurally, the court has to go through some steps on the juvenile side of it. Following this, Green was granted a transfer so that he could be tried as an adult. He waited 2.5 years before he would be tried in court. Green pleaded no contest on July 29, 2022. This plea means Green gave up his right to a jury trial. A jury trial meant he was to face a charge of first-degree murder. He also gave up his chance to challenge the plea or the consequences of his decision. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022 to be presided over by Judge Suzanne Kingsbury. At sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor in psychological science education, was called in on educational capacity to explain to the court the development of an adolescent. Kaufman's research explained the varying development needs of adolescents with regard to emotional and cognitive development. The late adolescent stage allowed an individual to understand right from wrong, yet at the same time, they're also functioning under diminished capacity for impulse control. The defense called several witnesses from Green's childhood, some who even maintained relationships with him into adulthood. Each witness was asked if their opinion had changed of him since the knowledge of his confession. All witnesses agreed they'd been shocked to discover that he was responsible for the murder of Hilton. Individuals who knew him in varying capacities described him as jovial, popular, funny, and loving. These words were used to describe him before and after the murder. Green's ex-wife, Karen Green, said, after witness statements were given, each of Jane Hilton's children presented their victim impact statements. They all described the unforgivable loss that Green inflicted upon their family. The why it happened and how different my life could have been will haunt me forever, said Heather Purvis McConnell, one of Jane's daughters. Argith Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, said, I loved my mother, and I assume Michael loves his mother too. I want to know what he would feel or what he would say to the person who stabbed your mother 29 times. What would you do if you received an early morning call to tell you your mother is dead? The court listened to her description of the feeling of gathering her mother's belongings from the house in which she was killed. Ardith finished with a powerful declaration. We will always have something in common, regretting the stupid decision you made 37 years ago. Hilton's son, Ian, echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the uncertainty the family faced and the recurring nightmares they suffered, especially after the crooked finger of blame was pointed at his own sister, Autumn. He broke down in tears as he ended with an almost inaudible remark. All the words we say will never bring my mother back. Autumn was the last to speak. Her statement showed true agony as she recounted the cloud of suspicions she'd lived under for the last 2 decades. Recounting the day 2 crew-cut, thick-mustached detectives came into her house telling her they found the people responsible for her mother's death. She was then repeatedly accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn went on to say that if she hadn't said the word lawyer at that point, she did not know how much further the intimidation tactics of the investigators could have gone. Afterwards, Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he asked Green what made him end Jane's life in such a brutal manner. "You beat her. She had numerous wounds around her head and face. By your own words, you kicked her jaw. You bit her on the shoulder. Why was that?" Linden continued to read the statement that expressed how Green didn't just murder Jane, he destroyed numerous lives in the process. Linden then asked Green if he'd given any thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her achievements and the love she had for each of her children. In closing arguments, Margaret Husher, Green's defense attorney, stressed the idea that he was unable to stop himself. She emphasized that he did not know what he was doing was wrong, as he was an adolescent at the time. This argument was based on the testimony of expert witness Dr. Kaufman. She asked that the court show mercy as she read off the multiple penal codes and rules of the court. Judge Kingsbury interjected by saying, "The court is not going to put him on probation," effectively ending any further comment from the defense. In response, Linden thanked the court and said the application for probation was offensive. He said, "It was a smack to this family who had endured this for decades." Linden stated that he already got away with murder for 37 years. Placing him on probation allowed him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury said she had heard a multitude of arguments about murder cases surrounding adolescent development. She remarked that after her 26 years on the bench, Jane Hilton's murder was by far the most brutal. Before passing her sentence, Kingsbury asked the family for their forgiveness for the trauma they had suffered, although she was not originally assigned the case. She also hoped they would heal from the pain, as it would have been their mother's wish. Kingsbury then encouraged Green to use all resources at his disposal in the California Department of Rehabilitation. "You're the key to the questions these people have. Doing that could ultimately help you with your outcome as it relates to parole," said Kingsbury. In closing, Kingsbury pointed out that she had heard from his friends that there's a great side to him and that he has much to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and remained at the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution will be decided after further consideration by the court. Davis was released on February 13, 2020, and planned to celebrate over pizza with his family. His lawyer, Melissa O'Connell, said he will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation for the wrongful conviction. Although the amount was high enough for him to re-enter society and start afresh, O'Connell said it could not make up for the years of freedom that he lost. Davis went on to sue the state for damages, covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020 for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit names El Dorado County as well as former detectives Richard Strasser, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, who's deceased and being sued through his estate, and Larry Hennig. Sheriff's Office pathologist, Dr. Robert Anthony, has also been included in the complaint. The Village Life newspaper reported that Davis was homeless after being released. The lawsuit is still pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644. This bill would, commencing January 1, 2024, prohibit law enforcement officers from employing threats, physical harm, deception, or psychological manipulative interrogation tactics, as specified during a custodial interrogation of a person 17 years of age or younger. The bill faced opposition, but District Attorney Van Pearson is urging all law enforcement to stop using intimidation tactics. Pearson stated that 10 years ago, he would have viewed the methods used to get a confession differently. However, after seeing the true impact it can have, he believed there is room for change. This also comes after research points to deceptive tactics being used for years by law enforcement that will presume guilt and focus on getting a confession rather than getting the full story. The district attorney is implementing this new policy in his office and is urging other district attorneys to do the same. El Dorado County DA's office will now reject any case where the primary evidence is a confession obtained using threats, lies, or psychological manipulation interrogation tactics. These measures are to ensure that no one is ever again convicted based on a coerced false confession, like the case of Ricky Davis. Pearson personally apologized to all involved in the miscarriage of justice caused by the tactics used by then investigators into the brutal 1985 murder of Jane Hilton. After 37 years, the right man is finally facing justice. Yet the lives of so many were left broken by mistakes and false accusations. For Jane Hilton's family, hopefully they can now pick up the pieces after being divided over the innocence of their own sister, Autumn. Ricky Davis can never regain the liberty he lost. And Michael Green destroyed not only the lives of the victim's family and friends, but the lives that he touched in the years before and after the murder. What are your thoughts on today's case? Did Michael Green deserve the sentence he received? Does this clean record minus the murder make him innocent of intentional murder? How could he let an innocent man take the blame for his actions? Can Ricky Davis ever get his life back on track even when he does receive compensation? And why is it taking so long? 911, where's your emergency? Someone is a robber at a pawn shop. Someone's robbing the pawn shop. And my parents got shot. Where is the robber? He's right here right now. Where are your parents? Oh, they're dead on the ground. Come here, where's your parents? Because I'm afraid. The police immediately rushed to the scene of the crime, hoping to save 9-year-old Andrew and his 14-month-old sister, Naomi. An unknown man had committed a ruthless attack on the priest and his family. Leaving no traces behind, the criminal made it one of the detectives' most challenging cases in the detectives' careers. Fortunately, they managed to find witnesses who had seen everything. Their testimonies helped uncover the truth about what had really happened to the Hawkinsmith family. In 2013, in Danville, Kentucky, 35-year-old priest Michael Hawkinsmith, who had previously worked as a manager at a local pawn shop, had to take full control of the pawn shop due to the former owner's health condition. As a former priest, Michael had always been honest with people. He easily found common ground with others and was always willing to help. When he decided to get married, no one doubted his choice. Angie was his first love, and everyone saw her as a very sweet and kind girl. Michael literally worshipped the ground she walked on. When the couple had children, their relationship became even stronger. Together, they were a very happy family. As the Hawkinsmith family expanded, so did their business. The pawn shop, ABC Gold, games and more became a successful family venture, attracting regular customers like broker Dan Smith, with whom they often conducted business on Fridays. Life seemed perfect for the Hawkinsmiths until one day in 2013, when an unknown man decided to disrupt their peaceful existence. 911, where's your emergency? Someone is a robber at a pawn shop. Someone's robbing the pawn shop. And my parents got shot. Where is the robber? He's right here right now. The robber, does he have a gun? Yes, he shot my parents. Okay, can he see you? I'm in the back right now. You're in the back. So the robber's in front of the store? Yes, but I don't know if he's here or not. But come quickly. Where are your parents? They're dead on the ground. Come here quickly, because I'm afraid. Please hurry. Okay, they're coming, okay? 6 minutes after the phone call, police officers arrived at the scene of the crime. When they entered the building, their attention was immediately drawn to a large, bloody trail, which led them to Michael Hawkinsmith. Moments later, they found his 38-year-old wife, Angie. And on the other side of the counter, they discovered the third victim of the crime, 60-year-old broker Dan Smith. All three victims had gunshot wounds to the head and torso. A few minutes later, officers found Andrew Hawkinsmith and his little sister Naomi hiding in a closet. The officers' accounts indicated the unimaginable horror these young children had endured. Suddenly, the 9-year-old boy and his 14-month-old sister were left orphaned, having lost both parents. Upon examining the crime scene, police found 14 spent .22 caliber shell casings and 3 intact bullets, along with a briefcase that belonged to Dan Smith. The victim's personal belongings and all the cash in the register were left untouched, suggesting that robbery was not the motive for the crime. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop, posing a significant obstacle to the investigation. The police had no choice but to rely on finding potential witnesses to the crime. An employee of the nearby Rainbowy Cleaners was able to describe a car that had parked near the building that morning. It was a silver minivan, driven by a large man with a thick beard. While one group of investigators searched the surrounding area, another informed the closest relatives about the tragedy that had befallen their loved ones. Michael's parents found it difficult to accept the circumstances that someone in their right mind could wish harm to their children. Nevertheless, They tried to find any positive aspect in the situation, and the fact that their grandchildren had survived could not but rejoice them. If it hadn't been for Andrew and Naomi, I don't think it was worth it. Soon, the tragic news reached the daughter of the third victim, Dan Smith. He was involved in buying precious metals and skillfully adapted to the specifics of his work, easily finding common ground with different people. His business involved handling large sums of cash, sometimes exceeding hundreds of thousands of dollars. This led the police to consider the theory that Dan Smith himself could have been the primary target of the criminal. Tracking the man's movements revealed that before he arrived at the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop, he had visited Lawson's jewelry store in Harrodsburg, located 10 miles northeast of Danville. In the jewelry store, investigators found a surveillance camera positioned on the far wall to capture every visitor entering and exiting the store. They hoped that the recording would help them determine if anyone had been following Dan Smith. Smith entered the store at 8:16 in the morning, and there were no other customers in the building at the time. He was carrying the same briefcase that was later found at the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop. After greeting the woman behind the counter with a smile, headed to the back of the store. Sometime later, Dan Smith reappeared on the footage, coming out from the back of the store, saying something to an elderly woman who had just entered, and then immediately leaving. It was a typical day in the life of the jewelry store. The external camera recording showed nothing suspicious. The police were left to helplessly monitor the man who had no idea he would soon be at the center of a tragic event. Meanwhile, 9-year-old Andrew Hawkinsmith was taken to the police station to give his testimony. Andrew described how he had been at the pawn shop with his parents when Dan Smith arrived carrying a bag full of money. While his father and Dan were talking, a stranger entered and immediately demanded the bag. According to the boy, Dan Smith immediately handed over his briefcase, after which the stranger shot him. My father asked him to stop, but he also shot him with a pistol similar to the one I play with, Andrew said. Meanwhile, the mother instructed Andrew to take Naomi to the back of the store and hide in the closet. Andrew took his little sister and hid. It was then that the criminal aimed the gun at Angie. I don't know who he is and why he did it, but it seems to me that the reason was money, the 9-year-old boy concluded. He described the stranger as a very tall man with a blonde beard that looked fake, matching the description provided by a witness from Rainbow Cleaners. To follow all possible leads, the police's next step was to thoroughly examine the business run by the Hawkinsmith family. It turned out that the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop had another owner, Steve Devine. While he usually attended Friday deals with Dan Smith, he was absent on the tragic morning of September 20th. This information raised concerns, making determining his whereabouts a top priority. Steve Devine explained that he had developed an allergy that morning and was forced to cancel all his appointments, a story confirmed by his wife. The alibi and the fact that Steve Devine did not own a silver minivan helped to rule him out as a suspect. He also explained why there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop. According to him, the security system had been removed by the previous owner, Kenneth Allen Keith, and the new owners had not yet installed a replacement. 48-year-old Keith, like his deceased friend Michael Hawkinsmith, was a priest. Pastor Keith sold the pawn shop when he was diagnosed with brain cancer, but he remained the owner of another similar establishment, Gold Rush Buyers, in Pulaski County, neighboring Danville's Boyle County. Michael's family revealed that he prayed for his friend every evening, hoping for his recovery. Their friendship, which began when Michael worked at a youth church camp, had lasted for 15 years. The Hawkinsmith family always held Pastor Keith in high regard, and for their son Andrew, he was like a beloved uncle. With no significant leads, investigators decided to try their luck in finding possible street surveillance systems near the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop. They found a camera on the office building of the real estate office Danville Rentals. The surveillance footage captured a silver minivan at 8:45 in the morning, but the image was too blurry to identify the license plate or the make of the vehicle. Once again, the police had to rely on the witness's testimony from Rainbow Cleaners, which described the car as an old model with a distinctive square body shape. The car in the video clearly showed a square rear bumper that matched this description. The color, type, and shape of the car all indicated that the police had found the criminal's vehicle. They continued to search for surveillance systems farther and farther from the pawn shop. At 8:17 in the morning, the camera at the local Ephraim McDowell Hospital captured the same vehicle, and finally, investigators were able to determine that it was a silver Dodge minivan. Michael and Angela's family organized a candlelight vigil in their memory. Hundreds of compassionate people attended that evening, demonstrating the depth of love for their lost ones. Similarly, like the Hawkinsmith family, Dan Smith's close relatives were outraged that the whims of another had led to the loss of their loved one. Despite their grief, they chose not to let anger overshadow their other emotions and joined in the funeral proceedings. Meanwhile, the Danville Police Department appealed to the public for any information about the criminal or his vehicle. Immediately after this, on September 24th, the police received a call from Tracy Harold, a pastor in Warren, Michigan. He claimed to be a friend of Kenneth Keith and mentioned that during their last conversation, they touched on the topic of the murder in Danville, and at that moment, Mr. Keith seemed to change. Pastor Kenneth Allen informed his friend that on that particular day, he was driving to Danville for medicine for his wife. He also expressed a sense of guilt for what happened, as he had given Michael Hawkinsmith the opportunity to become the owner of his former business. Keith put forward the theory that Dan Smith himself could have been the main target of the attacker. Keith explained that Dan would come to him every Sunday to pawn all his gold, always carrying large sums of cash with him. Keith speculated that someone might have tracked Dan's route and ultimately targeted him, but there was more to the story. As it turned out, the pastor's relationship with the Hawkinsmith family was not as everyone had believed. These words raised suspicions, leading to Pastor Keith being added to the list of suspects. To verify his alibi, investigators decided to review the surveillance footage from the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, where, according to the pastor, he bought medicine for his wife. At 9:24 in the morning, a man entered the pharmacy, indeed Pastor Kenneth Allen Keith, but he looked nothing like the man who had committed the triple attack just minutes earlier. He was not wearing a green jacket or a beard, which were distinctive features of the assailant. However, this did not rule out his involvement in the attack. There was a 7-minute gap between Andrew Hawkinsmith's call to the police and the pastor's arrival at the pharmacy. The police decided to check if it was possible to travel from the crime scene to the Good Neighbor Pharmacy in such a short time. They found that the trip took about 5 minutes in total, so it was plausible to commit the murders, quickly get into a car, and reach the pharmacy to establish a solid alibi. The key clue was that Pastor Keith had an unregistered 2008 Dodge minivan, which was silver. However, all the evidence found was circumstantial, and it was not enough for an arrest. So, investigators turned to Tracy Harold to participate in a series of fake phone calls aimed at the suspect. Luckily, Tracy agreed. During these calls, Pastor Keith finally revealed his true feelings towards the Hawkinsmith family. Keith began discussing details of the case that had not been made public. Following that, Pastor Kenneth Keith explained that he left Danville and returned to Somerset. He then took his car to the car wash to prepare it for a planned family vacation. At 10:50 in the morning, Keith was seen on camera walking down the hallway to the cashier's counter with a noticeable smile. It seemed clear that he was not involved in the dreadful crime that occurred earlier that morning. The external camera footage covering the parking lot showed Pastor Kenneth leaving the car wash in the same silver Dodge at 11:25, matching all the images previously obtained from various surveillance systems in Danville. At that point, they had enough evidence to arrest the suspect. He was offered a polygraph test to prove or alleviate his involvement in the pawnshop crime, but his response was rather unusual. Keith stated that he would not be able to pass the polygraph successfully because during his military service, he was tasked with eliminating 3 individuals. The investigators obtained a warrant to search Kenneth Allen Keith's pawnshop, where they discovered a fake beard and a significant amount of cash. The police could not find any legitimate explanation for how he acquired most of the money. They also found bundles of bills wrapped in a ribbon with the name of the bank that issued them, revealing Dan Smith as their client. Further investigation revealed that the money found in Keith's pawnshop had recently been withdrawn from the account of a dead broker. Additionally, several .22 caliber casings were found in Keith's pawnshop. According to ballistics analysis, they were fired from the same weapon used to shoot the parents of young Andrew and Naomi. Based on all the evidence found, Kenneth Allen Keith was charged with 3 counts of deliberate homicide and first-degree robbery. It turned out that Pastor Keith believed that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Devine had conspired to get rid of him from the business. Knowing that Dan Smith carried large sums of money, Keith decided to exact his revenge on the day of their planned meeting at the pawnshop. Keith aimed to mislead law enforcement into thinking the crime was motivated by robbery. In reality, Michael Hawkinsmith and his partner Steve Devine had no involvement in the imagined conspiracy against Keith. During the investigation, no evidence of discreditable activities by Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Devine was found. On September 20th, the criminal arrived in Danville in his silver Dodge Caravan. He circled the pawnshop for a while until he noticed Dan Smith's car parked nearby. The first victim was the broker himself, followed by Michael and then Angela Hawkinsmith. The pastor then took all the cash from Dan Smith's case and calmly left the crime scene, stopping at the Good Neighbor Pharmacy to be captured on its surveillance cameras and secure an alibi. His decision to go to the car wash was another attempt to remove traces and destroy any evidence that might have been left on his vehicle. In 2017, just before the trial, Kenneth Allen Keith pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Before the trial, investigators obtained medical documents from the Veterans Hospital and discovered that the pastor had never had a brain tumor. How could someone who seemed so spiritually inclined commit such a heinous crime? Furthermore, how was he going to live with the knowledge of what he had done? The events discussed in this video took place in 2007 in the state of Kansas, and although 16 years have passed since then, this high-profile case has yet to come to a conclusion. On January 5, 2007, 19-year-old Jody Sanderholm, who lived with her parents in Arkansas City, went to a dance rehearsal that was held at the college where she was attending. On that day, Jody did not return home and stopped answering her phone. Such behavior was unusual for her, so her parents immediately became concerned and decided to file a missing persons report with the police. Jody Leanne Sanderholm was born September 26, 1987 in Arkansas City to Brian and Cindy Sanderholm. She was the third child of her parents. She had a brother called Jason and a sister called Jennifer. From a young age, Jody was fond of dancing, and although it played a large role in Jody's life, she also did not neglect her studies. She was one of 4 valedictorians in her graduating class. While in high school, Jody was a member of the National Honor Society, a Kansas State Scholar, a Kansas Board of Regents Scholar, and earned the Outstanding Physics Student of the Year award presented by David Steinmetz. She was a member of the Ark City High School dance team for 4 years. 2 of those 4 years, she was the captain. In 2007, Jody was a member instructor of Ark City Dance and a Universal Dance Association instructor. After high school, she attended Cowley College where she studied pre-pharmacy. While at Cowley, she was a member of the Cowley Tigerette dance line. In 2007, the population of Arkansas City was about 12,000. Jody's parents, like probably other locals, thought it was a good and relatively safe place to live and raise children. However, after Jody disappeared and the details of what happened to her became known, many began to realize that safety was only an illusion and that the man was the most dangerous beast. On the morning of January 5, 2007, Jody drove her car, a Dodge Stratus, to college for a dance rehearsal that was scheduled to end at 10:45. After the rehearsal, she intended to return home. Cindy called her daughter's cell phone several times, but she didn't answer, which was highly unusual. Jody always kept in touch with her family, and even if she missed a call, she would call back soon. Cindy had a bad feeling about this. She decided to get off work and go home to see if Jody was all right. When she arrived, she immediately noticed that her daughter's car was not in front of the house, and this only increased her anxiety, because Cindy knew that by this time, Jody should have been back from rehearsal. Upon entering the house and looking around, Cindy realized that Jody had not returned home. Her dance uniform, which she put in the washing machine when she returned from rehearsal, was not there or in the hamper for her dirty clothes. The shower stall was dry, although Jody always showered after dance class. It soon became clear that Jody had no contact with her father or older sister Jennifer either. She had an appointment at noon, to which she never showed up. Cindy and Brian began calling their daughter's friends, hoping to find out where she might be, but after the morning rehearsal ended and Jody left college, none of her friends saw her. That evening, the college dance team was scheduled to perform at a basketball game, with a routine of which Jody was the choreographer. She wouldn't have missed it of her own free will, but she didn't show up either. At about 6 p.m., still unable to learn anything, and without waiting for their daughter to return home, Cindy and Brian contacted the police and reported her missing. Officers from the sheriff's office immediately put together flyers depicting and describing Jody, began to inquire about her last known whereabouts, and put out an APB on the vehicle she was traveling in. The The police learned from Cindy and Brian that Jody had a boyfriend she had been dating since high school. His name was Colby Wilson. When contacted by phone, he reported that he had been at his brother's house in Texas for several days. The police quickly ruled him out as a potential suspect because his stay in another state was confirmed. The next day, January 6th, was very eventful. Lori Leglighter, Jody's best friend with whom they had been friends and danced since high school, provided the police with important information. They both enrolled at Cowley College, where they went on to study dance. Lori reported that she left work at Sirloin Stockade in Arkansas City around 10 p.m., Tuesday, January 2nd, and noticed a light blue car drive by the restaurant several times as she left. On her way home, she noticed a car following her in her rearview mirror. "I thought something strange was going on," Lori told the detectives. She decided to see if the car behind her was really following her, so she started turning onto different streets. The driver of the car behind her was doing the same thing, and it really scared Lori. She drove to the local police station and parked next to it, thinking that the stalker would leave her alone. She didn't see him after she stopped, so she drove home again. However, she had to go back to the parking lot near the police station because she saw the car chasing her again. Lori sat in the car for a while before driving home. She told the detectives that she didn't go to the station because she thought it was someone else's stupid prank, but that wasn't really all. On Friday, January 5th, the band Tigerette Dance Line was rehearsing at the college. According to Lori, she and Jody got there around the same time and, as usual, parked not far from each other. Lori spotted the light blue car again. What's more, she recognized the man behind the wheel. It was a local resident, 23-year-old Justin Thurber. Lori did not know him personally, but had seen him several times in the company of his older brother and his friends. Lori and Jody left practice at the same time and were supposed to meet up later, but Jody never showed up for that meeting. Soon, several members of the dance team revealed that they, too, had seen Justin near the college during the past week. He always sat in his car in the parking lot and just watched. Within the first 24 hours of Jody's disappearance, police had driven all over the city but could not find her car. Arkansas City is surrounded by fields and wooded areas. They brought in a fixed-wing aircraft to search the area from the air. The car was more difficult to hide than a person because of its size, so the police hoped to be able to see Jody's car from the air. It was determined that the last time her cell phone signal was received, it was from a cell tower located near the Kaw Wildlife Area. This is a vast, wooded area along the Arkansas River. At this point in the investigation, only one person, Justin Eugene Thurber, who was identified by Lori Leglighter and other members of the dance group, was considered as a person who might be involved in the disappearance of Jody Sanderholm. It is important to note here that despite his young age, Thurber was well known to the police. 3 years earlier, in 2004, he had been charged with illegal possession of banned substances. He eventually received a suspended sentence and was released. 3 months after that, he was arrested for theft and probation violation. In October 2005, he was charged with disorderly conduct. 3 months later, he was arrested for petty theft and again found to be in possession of a controlled substance. On December 31, 2006, which was just 6 days before Jody disappeared, Thurber was arrested again for theft. That same day, after paying a $3,000 bail, he was free. Having had a merry New Year's Eve, the next day, January 1st, he began impersonating a police officer and disrupting public order. When the real cops came for him, Thurber complained of chest pain and was taken to the hospital instead of the station. Why he was not arrested after his discharge from the hospital remains unclear, nor is it quite clear why he managed to get away with it all the time. A relative of his who works for the Cowley County Police may have contributed to this, but that's only a guess. That same day, January 6th, a police officer saw Thurber's car, a light blue Cadillac, parked outside his parents' house and decided to talk to him. His father invited the officer into the house. When the police officer asked Justin where he had been yesterday, he said he had driven his car to Winfield, a town about 13 miles outside of Arkansas City, in the morning. There, according to Justin, he met up with his friend and 2 of his friend's buddies, whom he did not personally know very well. Next, the 4 of them began driving around the countryside in a car belonging to one of his friend's buddies until the car got stuck on a dirt road near Cedarvale. Then, as Thurber claimed, he walked toward Arkansas City, which is about 30 miles from Cedarvale. After 6 hours, he got tired of walking and called his father to pick him up. Thurber's father confirmed what he said, saying he picked Justin up wet and dirty, a couple of miles from Cowley State Fishing Lake. Justin also told the police officer that his car, which he left in Winfield, had been returned by friends. The story wasn't very convincing, but there was nothing to charge Thurber with yet, so the officer left. That same evening, officers spoke with Alexis Swartzel, who recently ended a 3-year relationship with Thurber. She told officers Thurber often took her to the Coyle Wildlife Area, southeast of Arkansas City, and she pointed out places she and Thurber would visit. When the police informed Alexis that they were investigating the disappearance of Jody Sanderholm, she was very surprised, and said that Justin had once said that he had begun watching Jody when he was 13 years old. He would peep at her when she was swimming in the pool in her backyard, and sometimes in the evenings, peek through the window in her room and wait for her to start changing clothes. Police asked Alexis about her reasons for breaking up with Thurber, to which she said she had broken up with him because he was too abusive and had strange tendencies that were becoming more and more frequent. On several occasions, she said, during intimacy, he would choke her unconscious. On top of that, he asked her to fight him because he could not get aroused any other way. It was becoming more and more obvious to the police by the minute that Justin Thurber might be involved in Jody's disappearance. The police had no evidence to link him to the girl's disappearance, but late in the evening of January 6th, Thurber was arrested anyway. Detective Eric Mata arrested Thurber on bail revocation and suspicion of criminal trespass because the investigation into Jody Sanderholm's disappearance revealed that Thurber was on the college campus, where the detective believed Thurber should not be. Thurber told Mata that he wanted to talk to his lawyer. At the same time, police officers arrived at Justin's parents' house with a search warrant. The officers took the shoes Justin had been wearing the day before when his father picked him up. The shoes were wet and were drying on a towel. Thurber's father told police he helped his son clean the mud off the shoes. The clothes Justin was wearing when his father picked him up were also recovered, but by this time he had had time to wash them. The next day, January 7th, searchers trained to identify human activity in rugged terrain, set to work in the Coyle Wildlife Area. They found shoe prints that matched Justin Thurber's, as well as several other smaller shoe prints. As darkness fell, they decided to continue the search the next day. On the way home, some searchers drove past Cowley County State Fishing Lake and decided to stop because they heard Thurber was wet when his father picked him up. They discovered a muddy tire track, muddy shoe prints near a public restroom, mail addressed to Jody Sanderholm's parents in a chemical toilet, dance shoes in another toilet, and a flip-flop sandal. Investigators later retrieved cut-off sweatshorts, a wallet containing Jody Sanderholm's driver's license and social security card, her black leotard, a tigerette jacket with Jody Sanderholm's first name on the front, a vehicle floor mat, and a car seat cushion. The sandal matched the impressions found at the Coyle Wildlife Area. Searchers spent the next 2 days around Cowley County State Fishing Lake and the Coyle Wildlife Area. On January 9th, specialists with sonar brought in to survey the bottom of the lake discovered Jody's sunken car. On the same day, the hope of the Sanderholm family also died. Jody's naked body was found under a pile of leaves, logs, and twigs at the Coyle Wildlife Area. Authorities found DNA evidence linking Justin Thurber to both Jody's car and her body. The car had been in the lake for more than 3 days, so police feared that the water that filled the interior had destroyed all evidence. That was partly true. Forensics spent a great many hours before they found a short hair in the interior. Carrie Melton, director of the Forensic DNA Testing Lab, ran mitochondrial DNA tests on the hair found on the driver's seat of Jody Sanderholm's car and concluded that it was almost certainly Justin Thurber's hair. Barbara Leal, an employee of a private DNA testing company, tested samples taken from Jody Sanderholm's right biceps and right side of her chest. She concluded that Thurber could not have been excluded as a participant, although 99% of the population could have been excluded. Cell tower data showed that on the day Jody disappeared, her phone and Justin Thurber's phone were in the same areas at the same time. Lori Legleiter, Jody's best friend, said she saw Thurber in the college parking lot the day she disappeared. When the police looked at the camera footage provided by the college administration, they were convinced that Lori was telling the truth. Thurber was in the college parking lot at the same time rehearsal was going on, and he left that parking lot at the same time as Jody. The tape showed that Thurber followed Jody in his light blue Cadillac, based on the fact that letters addressed to Jody's parents were found near the lake. Investigators speculated that Thurber had followed Jody from the college to her home, and when she got out to retrieve the letters from the mailbox, he attacked her, pushed her into her own car, and drove her away. That theory was confirmed when a shoe print identical to the sole of Justin Thurber's sneakers was found next to the Sanderholm family mailbox. As previously mentioned, footprints of Thurber's shoes and smaller shoe impressions were found at the Kaw Wildlife Area. It was determined that these were the footprints of Jody's shoes found at the fishing lake along with her other belongings. Thurber's footprints and Jody's footprints in the preserve were located side by side, walking along them. At one point, the searchers saw that Jody's footprints were interrupted, and Justin's footprints went deep into the woods. This meant that he was carrying the girl further on his own. His shoe prints were also found where the body had been found. All three of the people Justin said he had been with the day of Jody's disappearance denied what he said. They had not seen Thurber that day, which meant his story about the car being stuck near Cedar Vale was a fabrication. The three officers drove Thurber to Cedar Vale, so he could show them where he said he was. Thurber was unable to determine where he said the car was stuck. Back at the police station, Thurber volunteered to take a polygraph test. He also requested that his relative Chad Monroe, who worked for the Cowley County Sheriff's Office, be present during the questioning. The evidence found was sufficient to indict Justin Thurber. He himself denied guilt, and the judge set his bail at $1 million. Thurber's attorneys tried to convince the court that he was mentally retarded and incompetent, but were unable to do so. Thurber had graduated from high school and even attended college for some time, so the judge found the defense claim of his mental retardation unproven. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy testified at the trial. He said that the first time he looked at the body, he had no doubt that the last hours of Jody's life were very painful. Her entire body and face were covered with bruises and abrasions. There were clear signs of strangulation on her neck. It was strangulation that was named as the cause of death of Jody Sanderholm. I can't say all the information about what the medical examiner found during the autopsy. Not all horror movie maniacs are as brutal as Thurber was to Jody. Without going into detail, and at the same time to give you some idea of what happened at the Kaw Wildlife Area, I will say the following. The crime was motivated by carnal desire, and Thurber committed the crime with a stick. At trial, in addition to Thurber's ex-girlfriend, 6 other women testified, each claiming that the defendant stalked her. One of them was a coworker of his. In one case, she even had to call the police to have an officer walk her to her car after work. It was already dark, and she was afraid to go to the parking lot because she saw Justin waiting for her. Earlier, he had left a rose and a note under the windshield wiper of her car, saying he liked her and wanted to get to know her better. Several witnesses said they saw Jody Sanderholm's car on January 5, 2007. Carrie Morris, a friend of Jody's, noticed that Jody was sitting in the passenger seat as their cars passed each other in Arkansas City shortly after noon. Morris reported that the man behind the wheel of Jody's car appeared to be a large man. She called Jody's cell phone, but received no answer. 2 other women reported seeing a vehicle that looked like Jody Sanderholm's car while driving on a dirt road south of Arkansas City around 3 p.m. One of them said the driver was Thurber and identified him in court. On February 17, 2009, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, finding Thurber guilty on all accounts and recommending that he be sentenced to death. Realizing what sentence the judge would hand down, Thurber tried to negotiate a plea bargain. His lawyer told the prosecutor that Justin would plead guilty if he were not given the capital punishment. Jody's family opposed such a deal. The presiding judge took the jury's decision into consideration and sentenced Thurber to death by lethal injection in March 2009. In 2008, the state of Kansas signed the Jody Act, which, among other things, expands police authority over stalking suspects and expands the list of actions that can be considered stalking. Since the sentencing, Justin Thurber has not abandoned his attempts to appeal the court's decision. His attorneys are trying to prove that Thurber is mentally retarded. In 2018, the Kansas Supreme Court postponed Thurber's death sentence, citing a Supreme Court of the United States ruling that the execution of defendants, even those with mild developmental disabilities, is unconstitutional. The Sanderholm family said a competency hearing was held during the original trial, and Thurber was found to be fully competent at the time. Jody's mother, Cindy Sanderholm, sat in the courtroom 11 years after her daughter's passing. She said that Thurber had written letters to other girls while in prison, and this should show that he was competent. That's sick. It's just sick, Cindy said. It tells you that he is competent enough to reach out to people and write letters. He knows what he is doing. I'm sure she, Jody, pleaded for her life, and he didn't give it to her. She didn't get a second choice. She didn't get a second chance, she added. In August 2021, the Kansas Supreme Court issued an opinion announcing that a state law passed in 2020 allows Thurber, who is appealing a death sentence, to seek appointment by the Cowley County District Court of an attorney to assist in post-conviction DNA testing. Thus, even 16 years after Jody Sanderholm's passing, the final word in this case has yet to be spoken. It should also be noted that no one has been executed since Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994. The last time anyone was executed in Kansas was in 1965. Since then, besides Thurber, 9 other people have been sentenced to death, but no sentence has been carried out. We haven't executed anyone in that time frame, and there's no timetable to have any other future executions, said Adam Pfannenstiel, the communications spokesperson for Kansas Department of Corrections. I think it's a little shocking that Kansas reinstated the death penalty over 20 years ago, and there's not a plan yet, said Jennifer Aldridge, Jody's older sister. I thought this would have been something that would have been discussed 20 years ago when it was reinstated. Therefore, even if Thurber's death sentence is upheld, there is a good chance that it will never be carried out. 39-year-old Justin Thurber remains at the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. According to a Kansas Legislative Post-Audit Committee report published in 2014, each of the inmates serving time in administrative segregation at El Dorado comes with an annual cost of nearly $49,000. Further, it is not only the cost to house an inmate sentenced to death. Taxpayers also pay nearly 4 times the price to prosecute a case where the death penalty, if pursued by the prosecution, $395,000 per case, compared to only $100,000 per case when the death penalty is not sought. For the Sanderholms, taxes are added insult to an unbearable injury and a grueling wait for justice in the case of their daughter, Jody. It hurts me so bad every week when I see my paycheck, and I know I'm paying tax money to feed him, said Brian Sanderholm. Death is what he deserves, and that's what the law stated, said Cindy Sanderholm. So, we need to get the law fixed so we can use it. If it was your daughter, your son, it was our daughter, what would you want to have happen? Asked Brian Sanderholm. Most regrettably, Cynthia and Sanderholm, Jody's mother, passed away on December 2nd, 2022, at the age of 63. The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents, and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, When Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice. Adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LeBar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months, and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LeBar. The man had previously been married twice, and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion, who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that, from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over, another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch, La Bar, constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable, and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire, and talked about her untold wealth inherited by her. In 2004, La Bar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLorge. He was in a difficult life situation, and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and Labar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love, and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks, but he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors, who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange, and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings, but that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Deluge, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made, a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Hanny Michael and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person